Hello, folks. Welcome back to Introduction to the Christian Scriptures. This is our 11th video. On a normal semester, it'd be week 11. And we are going to talk about the Synoptic Gospels today. This is taken from chapter 6 of the textbook Engaging the Christian Scriptures, published in 2021 by Arterbury, Bellinger, and Dobson. And so let's go ahead and jump into this. This is a lot of material, so I'm probably only going to make it halfway through the chapter today, and I'll have to do a part 2. So let's get started. The Synoptic Gospels, here's your outline. What I suppose we'll be able to cover today is the world of the Gospels, which talks about the Palestinian world of Jesus, population and culture, the world of the evangelists, which was a more cosmopolitan world about 30, 40, 50 years later after the death of Jesus, the genre and literary tradition of the Gospels, whether or not Matthew was written first, or was Mark written first, or is there some secret document that's been lost called Q? And that's about all we'll be able to make it through today because of limitations of time. But I plan to do a part 2 where we do a deeper dive into the book of Mark, the book of Matthew, and the book of Luke. So let's get started. This is a classic picture of Jesus from one of the early centuries. There's a lot of different pictures that envision him in a lot of different ways. So, hold on a second. So the introduction to the Gospels. The New Testament begins with 4 distinct narratives about the life and ministry of Jesus. They are the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. I used to have to memorize that when I was a little kid in Sunday school. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Following the Gospels is a narrative about the ministry of the earliest followers of Jesus called the Acts of the Apostles, supposedly written by the same author who wrote the Gospel of Luke, and it serves as a sequel to the Gospel of Luke. Even though the Gospels and Acts are placed at the beginning of the New Testament, they are not the earliest New Testament texts. The distinction of the earliest New Testament text goes to Paul's letters, written in the 50s and 60s of the Common Era. So the word of the Gospels. The 4 Gospels were written between the years of 65 and 100 of the Common Era by anonymous second-generation Christians. The names Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are secondary attributions that originated in the mid-2nd century of the Common Era. There are elements of 2 different historical contexts in the Gospels. The Palestinian world of Jesus, the actual world that the person of Jesus of Nazareth lived in, as described in the Gospels. Then there's the world of the evangelists, which was written decades later after the death of Jesus and was less rural and more cosmopolitan. And here is a map of the area. On the left, you see the larger map, or the zoom out view, with Samaria, Judea, Decapolis, the Sea of Galilee, Nazareth, Galilee. Caesarea is on the coast, as is Joppa. And then on the right, you see a kind of a zoom in closer view centered on the Sea of Galilee, which shows Galilee at the top. And Caesarea Philippi is up in Syria. Below Galilee is Nazareth, Capernaum, Cana. A lot of the place names you'll hear in the Gospels, areas where Jesus circulated and his ministry grew in popularity. Then there's Samaria, and then on the east bank is the Decapolis. This is Roman Palestine. with Galilee, as it was called in that day. The Palestinian world of Jesus included a number of other areas in addition to Judea, Samaria, Syria, and Galilee. Jesus grew up in a small Galilean village called Nazareth, but he was put to death in the capital city of Judea, Jerusalem. In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, which are called the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus' ministry is centered in Galilee, where he, with only one trip to Jerusalem for the Passover, where he's put to death. In the Gospel of John, however, Jesus travels back and forth between Judea and Galilee and celebrates 3 Passovers in Jerusalem. One of the differences between the Synoptics and the Gospel of John. During the time of Jesus' ministry, Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, ruled Galilee. Herod Antipas was a client ruler of Rome, meaning that he had his own army consisting of Jewish troops and mercenaries. So Roman rule in Galilee was a mediated rule, not an occupation. They mediated their rule through Herod Antipas. The population and culture of Galilee were predominantly Jewish, although there were Gentiles living in Caesarea Philippi and Decapolis. Although Jesus would have encountered some Gentiles, he ministered largely to a Jewish culture, and he was shaped by his Jewish heritage. A Roman governor also ruled in Judea, with headquarters in the coastal city of Caesarea, with approximately 3,000 Roman troops at his disposal. He traveled to Jerusalem several times a year, especially for Passover. The governor appointed a Jewish high priest from the aristocracy to be his delegate. The high priest and the aristocracy oversaw local matters with limited authority. The world of the evangelists, that is, of the world at the time the Gospels were actually written, which was, again, 40 or 50 years after the death of Jesus. The Gospels reflect the Palestinian world of Jesus, but they also reflect a more cosmopolitan world of the evangelists 50 years later. For example, Jesus spoke Aramaic, but the Gospels are written entirely in Greek. Jesus' ministry was rural, but the Gospels likely originated in urban settings. Jesus taught in oral forms, but the Gospels are literary productions. Scholars usually reconstruct the world of the evangelists in 2 ways: the broader context of the Greco-Roman world and the specific communities from which or to which the evangelists wrote. The Gospel of Mark, for example, was probably written in Rome during a time of persecution, either under Nero in 63 of the Common Era, or as a backlash from the Jewish revolt of 66 through 73. Mark has a proclivity for translating Aramaic terms, which suggests that Mark was writing for a Gentile audience. Matthew originated most likely in Antioch in Syria, and alludes to a bitter separation between the Christian community and the Jewish community, likely in the 80s of the Common Era. This tension is reflected in Jesus' woes in Matthew 23, and the self-imposed responsibility of the Jews as a whole for the death of Jesus in chapter 27, verse 25. This does not support anti-Semitism, but it reflects an intra-Jewish conflict between Christian Jews and non-Christian Jews. The community situation of the Gospel of John is more complex. The Gospel of John is closely associated with 3 New Testament letters, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of John. Although they probably were not written by the same author, they likely do reflect the same community. Second, the Gospel of John likely reflects issues that arose over a period of time, rather than one single point at a time. One criticism of the book of John is the way that the narrative uses the word Jews, the Jews, in a prejudicial manner. Criticisms of the Jews in John likely reflect an early conflict between Christian Jews and non-Christian Jews over the nature of the divinity of Jesus. This would naturally have led the Johannine community to reach out to the Gentiles. Conflicts arose within the Johannine community when one group began to emphasize the divinity of Jesus to the exclusion of his humanity, leading the writers of the letter to condemn the denial of his humanity in 1 John 4:2, 2 John 7, and John 1:14. The emphasis on love in the letters might have been a strategy to try to encourage unity in the midst of a great deal of division. Then that brings us to the Gospel of Luke. Most scholars recognize that the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles represent a more sophisticated literary composition than the other two Gospels, or the other three. A more likely Gentile, and more than likely a Gentile audience. Both Luke and Acts address a possible patron, Theophilus, which means God lover. Luke was probably intended for a broader Christian, mostly Gentile readership, addressing larger issues of the Christian movement as a whole. And this brings us to genre and literary traditions. The genre of the Gospels is particularly interesting. The term gospel, which comes from the Greek euangelion, means good news. It initially referred to an oral announcement or proclamation both in the Jewish scriptures and in Greco-Roman writings. In the Christian tradition, it is first associated with Jesus, who proclaimed the good news of God in Mark 1:14 and the good news of the kingdom in Matthew 4:23. With the early Christians, the word gospel also implied the person of Jesus. For example, the gospel concerning his son in Romans 1:3. It is not until the 2nd century of the Common Era that the term gospel became a designation for literary texts that narrate the life and ministry of Jesus. There was a particular genre of the ancient biography referred to as a life, in Greek bios, or in Latin vita. This is where we get our curriculum vitae, the CV that we use in academia. Examples of other ancient biographies include Tacitus' Agricola, Lucian's De Monax, Diogenes Laertius' Lives of Eminent Philosophers, and Philo's Life of Moses. The author of these ancient biographies attempted to provide an objective and comprehensive account of a person's life by giving attention to the subject's early psychological development, demonstrating how the subject was a product of his or her own time and culture. Ancient biographies, however, were not written to be entirely objective. Instead, the authors of the ancient biographies hoped that readers would adopt a particular perception of the subject and imitate the subject's life. They sought to portray the essence of the person by composing a selective narrative of sayings and deeds that culminated in the subject's death. The hero's death, in particular, was thought to be that the subject's death most clearly illuminated the subject's essential character or core self. While writing their ancient biographies about Jesus, the authors of the Gospels selected, arranged, and shaped traditions and sources with the hope of persuading their readers to adopt specific viewpoints about Jesus. Scholars commonly compare the Gospels to artistic portraits. This brings us to a note about the historical Jesus. This was a particular school of scholarship that attempted to pull back the curtain and discover the historical Jesus. While all scholars recognize the portrait-like character of Jesus in the Gospels, some are more interested in discovering the Jesus of history. behind the interpretive narratives of the Gospels. Using a variety of methods and criteria, these scholars strip the Gospels of their interpretive elements in order to get back to the historical Jesus. Scholars have offered various reconstructions of the historical Jesus, and ironically, these scholarly constructs differ from one another just as much as the Gospels themselves differ. This variety stems from the criteria used to compile the reconstructions and from the prior assumptions held by the scholars regarding the degree of continuity that exists between the depiction of Jesus in the Gospels and the actual Jesus of history. Some stress a radical discontinuity, others emphasize a realistic continuity. So in other words, the author is saying that the quest for the historical Jesus has not been particularly successful or united in their discoveries. We've noted that the Gospels were written 35 to 70 years after the death of Jesus by anonymous second-generation Christians. We have no evidence that Jesus' disciples ever took written notes during his ministry. What sources did the authors of the Gospels rely on to compose their lives of Jesus? So the first thing would be the oral tradition. Written sources are most evident in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Because they have such striking similarities, there must be a literary relationship among the Gospels as well as an oral tradition. In other words, one or two of these Gospels must have certainly served as a source for the others. This brings us to the Synoptic Problem, as it's called. The word synoptic means see together, and it refers to the fact that Mark, Matthew, and Luke share a similar structure, content, and wording. Thus, they are known as the Synoptic Gospels. So there are several different approaches to this, or theories. One is the theory that Matthew was written first. The 4th century Bishop Augustine held that the Gospel of Matthew was the earliest gospel written. In 19th century, J.J. Griesbach modified Augustine's theory by saying that Mark was written last as an abbreviated version of Matthew and Luke. And here is a little graphic describing the two theories. In one, you see Matthew's Gospels first, which leads to both Luke and Mark, although some of Mark was incorporated into Luke. On the right-hand side, you see Matthew's Gospels first, leading to Luke and Mark, but Mark also adopted some of Luke's material. So those are two different hypotheses about the order in which the Gospels were written. The scholarly consensus today is that the Gospel of Mark is the earliest Gospel and that it served as the source document for Matthew and Luke. Here are some reasons why that's the consensus of scholars. Both Matthew and Luke seem to improve on Mark. Mark's beginning and end seem incomplete. Mark does not include Jesus' birth and post-resurrection appearances. Matthew and Luke smooth out and correct Mark's sometimes awkward Greek. It's more logical to imagine Matthew and Luke making improvements to their source than it is to envision Mark creating a less sophisticated, less polished, and less complete narrative based on more polished and complete sources. And here is a graphic showing the Markan priority. So there's two different theories about the priority of Mark. One on the right shows Mark by itself being adapted and used as a guide or a source for both Matthew and then later Luke. And then Luke takes some things that are not in Mark but are in Matthew and brings it into Luke. Then the other theory is that there was Mark's gospel and also another document that has been lost that they called Q, Sayings of Jesus, and both of these two documents served as the sources for Luke and Matthew. The reason for this is that there's material that appears in Luke that does not appear in Mark, and some material that does not appear in Matthew. So where did it come from? The two-source hypothesis is that both Matthew and Luke used Mark as a source, but they did not have knowledge of one another. This comes from a comparison of the beginnings and endings of Matthew and Luke. They both provide an infancy narrative, but the details differ considerably. The same is true for the resurrection appearances. But if they were written without knowledge of one another, in other words, the idea is if they had known about the other document, they would have probably harmonized their narrative better than they did. But if they were written without knowledge of one another, how can they share 200 verses that do not appear in Mark? So scholars came up with another theory that there's an unknown source named Q, which comes from the French word, I think it's actually a German word, Quelle. Q is a hypothetical source reconstructed from the approximately 220 to 230 verses that are shared by Matthew and Luke, but they do not appear in Mark. And we are at 21 minutes. I hate to bore you by going 40 minutes. So I think we will stop here today. We're about halfway through the first part of chapter 6 of Arterbury, Bellinger, and Dobson's book, Engaging the Christian Scriptures. Later on this week, I will record part 2 for this week 11 lesson. Thank you very much. It's always a delight to share this time with you. I'm learning a lot. I hope you are, and we will talk again soon. Thank you. Bye.